Hello, I'm Courtney Carr, the Marketing and Education Manager for IAPD. Thank you for joining today's e-training webinar, Freight Transportation Logistic Challenges, Is This the New Norm? Presented by Justin Hall, the Chief Customer Office of YRCW. During the presentation, you may submit the questions into the Question tab on your webinar toolbar, and we will address them at the conclusion of the presentation. There is a handout of today's presentation in the toolbar as well. Following the webinar, you will receive a link to a survey. Once you have completed the survey, there will be a link to download the presentation slides. You will also receive a recording of today's webinar. Feel free to share the recording and slides with others in your office. As Chief Customer Office of YRCW, Justin is responsible for designing and deploying technology, transport, and supply chain solutions that will improve the customer experience. YRCW companies have one of the largest, most comprehensive, less-than-truckload networks in North America, with local, regional, national, and international capabilities. Hall graduated from the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, with a bachelor's in entrepreneurship. He is a recent EY Entrepreneur of the Year finalist and is a Scrum Master certified. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Justin Hall.
Thank you, Courtney. Hey, good morning, everyone. Hopefully my volume is okay. Hopefully you're looking forward to finishing the week on a high note, and I'm just excited to have this time with you. I want to make sure there's ample time for Q&A, and so as we're moving through the presentation, please feel free to write those questions down. Maybe you have some pre-prepared. Hopefully you're able to also see the top 15 savings report that we published, and if not, we'll make sure everyone gets a copy of that. Real quickly, I just want to give compliments to IAPD. I know the association has been around north of 60 years. It certainly emphasizes collaboration and education for the betterment of the businesses and in turn your customer base, and certainly you all exist as an association too to help each other improve profitability and improve the strength of your partnership. So I will give you kudos for the length of tenure that this association has. It proves that you've got a very committed membership, and those of you showing up to this call are proving that you're committed to learning so that you can help your organizations navigate what are relatively turbulent times here in the supply chain environment, and certainly in transportation. Before I joined the YRCW companies, I was running a tech-enabled 3PL for about 15 years. Spent a lot of time really squeezing my way in as an intermediary between the asset-based community and the shipper community, not too different than the role of a distributor. I had to come in and be a value-add middleman, and the way I added value was using supply chain technology and consulting services to help people optimize their inbound and outbound transportation, and to look at things like order management, warehouse management, and figure out how do you use that to be a competitive advantage, and to avoid it, getting too high up the cost item list on the income statement. So I've tried to take really my background in software development and in disruption and play that role within these companies. And so as I tell you a little bit more about this organization, hopefully you'll get a little more context into the way we're thinking about our role as an asset-based provider with customers like you all, and how do we evolve and not just be capacity. Now, we have a lot of capacity, as you're going to see in the upcoming slides. The combination of our companies have allowed us to become about 25% of the publicly held market share in the LTL environment. If you looked at the entire $40 billion LTL sector, about 1 in 5 to 6 shipments are moving on our trucks. We're 32,000 employees strong. We drive just shy of 1 billion miles a year. So we are one of the largest networks in North America. I emphasize North America. We certainly have a very proud Canadian operation, YRC Reimer, which is really integrated with YRC Freight. We do have a Mexico operation, and so we do cross-border, and now we also offer non-asset-based services in the realm of truckload, expedite, big and bulky home delivery, forward storage and reverse logistics warehousing, along with a few other categories on the brokerage side. Within North America, YRC Freight is our long haul entity, and I don't want this to be a big, long commercial, but just to give you context, YRC Freight is probably the most commonly known brand within the IAPD Association. We do have regional carriers that are best in class, Reddaway out in the Western 11 in Alaska. We've got Holland, throughout the Midwest and the Southeast, and then New Penn in the Northeast. All also have Canadian cross-border relationships as well. I would like to see if there's ways that we can introduce the high-velocity regional networks into IAPD to complement our long-haul product with YRC Freight. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then just lastly, before we get into the state of the industry, what I wanted to kind of really share as it relates to my company and what, how we're looking at current state and into the future, what do we need to do to survive and thrive for ourselves and our customer base is probably, not too different than the strategic planning you're doing here at year end. We're coming into December. We're all getting crushed with forecasting season, but Q4 is always a great time to be very mindful of what are we going to do in the coming year that's different or unique from what we've done in the past to help us get stronger, or in my case, to help us add more value to our customer base. And one of the areas that we're really focusing on, if you look at what I'm declaring as our growth engine for tomorrow, is that I believe we have great power in our enterprise structure, and that tech is important as trucks. And so we've got a saying here, tech trucks together. You'll actually see a press release come out on Monday emphasizing the new approach that we're taking in the industry to try to evolve into a one-stop shop. And why that's important, if any of you had a chance to hear me live out in Washington, D.C. a few months back, what I was trying to emphasize to the group there is that we as a provider helping you navigate what is a tight capacity, high cost environment like we're in today, we've got to be able to offer more than just our equipment. And so we're looking at freight optimization, mode shifting, consolidation efforts. What are the things that we can do, again, to help you all in every possible category, whether we need technology to support that, using data and data analytics to find these opportunities, or even looking outside of our large network for new solutions through mode shift to help you control costs. So we'll talk about that. It's a priority for us, and hopefully it becomes a value add for you all. So looking at the current state of the environment, I'm not going to spend as much time as I did at the IAPD conference really talking about current state, because if we're reading the paper everywhere from the Wall Street Journal to numerous other mediums that are talking about why this is an unprecedented time, really it's because of a couple of areas. And why I want to highlight these slides for you all and why it should be important to you is that you all are educators within your business, and many of you on the phone have P&L responsibilities, either because you run your business or you're accountable to a customer base or your executive constituents, and they want to know what is going on right now that's causing transportation rates and even the cost of warehousing and fulfillment to be on the rise. And so just some education for you that you can use internally, at least stating why are we at where we're at from a present state. Certainly, we saw 4.5% GDP coming out of Q3. The numbers hit this week from the Fed that we're still north of 3% in GDP growth. So we've been in a 9-year, while at times tepid, 9-year bull run. That creates a lot of transportation demand. 60% of the GDP needs to move. It's not all services. A lot of this is goods, and even there's sectors that declare themselves as a service category have goods that need to move. So that creates demand. So of that 60% of the U.S. economy that's driven by goods consumption, 75% of that moves on surface, over-the-road trucking. So full truckload, flatbed, temp-controlled, LTL, small pack, last mile. These are trucks and drivers on the road, and so that's sort of the reality of where we're at in today's economy. Now, where are we headed? If we, really just pulled from the Congressional Budget Office versus my opinions or any other fodder, this is the projection moving out to 2028. We are looking at, what I'll call slow growth for the foreseeable future. It's not going to be 3 or 4%. But the thing we should keep in mind is that in the last 10 years, the economy has grown by north of $6 trillion. So even experiencing 1.5 to 2% of GDP growth on a near $20 trillion economy, that's big, real heavy dollar growth. That's good news, hopefully, for the IUPD membership, for your manufacturing base, for the customer base. We want a healthy economy, but we also don't want to see your margins get squeezed, because while you're enjoying potential top line growth, you can't let the bottom line get out of control, which is why I believe Courtney and her peers wanted to have me speaking to you all today on this webinar. So hopefully we're giving you meaningful tips to prevent too much margin squeeze because of logistics or transportation. Moving on, what are some of these other reasons why we're experiencing a tremendous jump in rates? We've got limitations in getting enough drivers. I employ 17,000 drivers across the YRCW companies. That's my greatest asset. I need more. We've hired 4,000 this year. I don't even want to tell you what my retention is. It's not near as much as I would like. So it's very hard to attract and retain qualified drivers. And then once you get them and you get them CDL certified, it's really hard to keep them. A very, very competitive environment for drivers. We're at about a 50,000 driver shortage here in 2018. And unfortunately, as you see with that green line, is moving the wrong direction. Up and right is a bad thing. We're looking at just a tremendous driver shortfall into the future years. Certainly, you all are depending on us to figure that out. What are we going to do about it? So we're looking at, personally here at the YRCW companies, we're looking at a variety of strategies to address this. Military recruiting is a big deal for us. We certainly advocate in DC for new rules around driver age. We really need to be able to get at the 18 to 21-year-old population so that they're not, jumping into the trades before we get a chance to show them life in transportation, be it as a dock worker or a driver. So anything and everything we can do from an HR and recruiting standpoint, we're trying new techniques. Certainly advertising through digital marketing is something that's important for us too. So our commitment to you as our customer base is we're going to do everything we can to try to address, the driver demand shortfall. You're probably wondering, if you weren't in the meeting with me several weeks back or a couple months back, why isn't autonomous driving the answer for that driver shortfall? And I guess I would tell you at some point it could be, right? At some point, at least I see when I say the near future, say the next, call it 5 to 10 years, we may see some proliferation of autonomous vehicles for, small passenger vehicles. But when you talk about an 85,000 pound tractor trailer combo, or if you've got, trips running down the road at north of, 95,000 pound gross loaded weight, just similar to planes and trains today, there's, the driving public's going to want to see a butt in the seat. So either way, we've got to have a driver community, but the value proposition may look differently as the technology changes within the cab. But what are the limitations? Because again, some of you as P&L constituents are going to get called out by your leadership, be it your CFO or your president. What's going on? Why are you controlling costs? And when you talk about this impact that not having enough drivers has on capacity and therefore demand, which drives rates, from GPS connectivity to weather events to our aging infrastructure, we all know that the gas tax dollars have not been spent efficiently enough to keep our roads clean and our bridges, to even getting into the more technical side of how do we create autonomous vehicle kits at scale? How do we avoid hacking or cybersecurity risks? And we obviously live in a very litigious society. So these are all things that could make driverless trucks a long way off, which is going to make driver shortage a big issue. Listen, it costs more to operate. I'm actually just left a meeting with one of my largest leasing providers talking about the cost of tractors and trailers these days. And for perspective, in the last 10 years, the cost of a Class 8 tractor has gone up almost $30,000. If you look at all the other factors that impact, at least the vehicle-based costs, such as fuel, right? Repair and maintenance, truck insurance premiums are through the roof. You got more insurance providers leaving the market. So the cost of insurance has gone up, tolls, permits. California alone's got about 50 regulations you got to comply with. That all, in addition to wages and benefits. If you want to find drivers, you got to pay them more. And if you pay them more, naturally, and they deserve it, it's a tough darn job. All those things can have an impact on costs. There's the Amazon effect. There's other factors. I don't want to spend too much time here. You're all aware of the impact that capacity can have on hurting the cost. So where I think we want to spend the majority of our time now, 20 minutes into this call, is what the heck do we do about it, right? I mean, I'm probably not telling you things that you're not aware of, so let's try to focus more on what we're going to do about it. And this is where I would invite you, if you see a concept, if you hear us discuss an idea that you want us to elaborate on, let's do it. That's what this call is all about, so please don't be shy. Let me pause real quick and let you know we've got a resource on the call today. Rick Willard is one of my directors of pricing. He's been in the industry north of 2 decades. I've yet to meet anybody that understands the LTL environment, both from a pricing and operations perspective, as well as Rick Willard. So he's on the call with me today so that I've got a little brains behind this webinar so that we answer your questions to the best of our ability, especially as we get into these top 15 LTL savings tips where we're talking about packaging and classification and planning and execution. So real quickly, just some light humor, what not to do. Certainly we want well-packaged freight. We'll talk about that as we get into tips. We got to treat our drivers well. Many of you, if you were in my presentation a few months back, or if you're following the Logistics Intelligence Brief, which is a morning email that we send out that's flush with usually about 15 to 20 articles tied to the industry, you've heard a concept called becoming a shipper of choice. Being a shipper of choice is a big deal. You all have a decision to make as an organization. Do we want to be a friendly shipper of goods or receiver of goods, right? And that starts with how we treat the drivers. Are we giving them, the opportunity to not be sitting idle and losing hours as they dwell at your docks or at the docks of your suppliers or at the docks of your customers? Time is money. When the ELD mandate hit this year, there is an automated way for us to track hours of service. There's no cheating your books anymore. That costs 17% of driver time because of this ELD mandate. They're, yet again, another capacity constraint driver. So because of that, it's all the more important that we run very smooth, efficient docks. And that sometimes for you as a distributor, if you're on the call as a distributor, you may say, well, I'm not always in control on the supply side or the receiving side. Doesn't matter. You've got to coach them up. You're in it as a team. They're going to cost you money. If you're the one paying the bill and footing the bill and you're seeing accessorials or you're seeing rate adjustments because, and it's not just from the YRCW company, I'm talking about all your carriers, be it on the LTL or truckload side, you've got to be able to spread that responsibility across anyone that's involved in touching transportation, loading, and receiving. Just something to be very, very mindful of. I'm going to get into more of what our sort of shipper of choice techniques that we can implement. One of the things I want to highlight is improved lead times and predictability is a big deal. While again, I run a set of LTL asset-based operations, I do run a freight brokerage as well. In our truck brokerage, let me give you some statistics that I think will be relevant for any of you that have full truckload shipping in your transportation budget. 75% of the trucks in any given market are already booked 1 full day in advance. 50% are already booked 2 full days in advance, and only 25% 3 days in advance. So what I'm telling you there is as you get closer to the time of pickup, the amount of trucks available becomes less and less. Thanks, Captain Obvious. You're probably rolling your eyes, but what that means is you think upstream around how you plan for the pickup of your goods. And this might mean, how do I plan to not just have a single pallet pickup, but to have a multi-bill pickup? That is arguably, a top 2 or 3 way for you to save money in LTL. Another way to save money in LTL is obviously trying to find a way to have volume, even partial truckload shipments. It's a great way for the LTL carrier to optimize space in the trailer. That's what we sell, space in the trailer. If I can fill space in my trailer with as few pickups as possible, that's a big deal. If I'm a truckload carrier, and you can give me advance notice of when I need to pick up, this helps me for driver planning. It helps me fill backhauls. It helps me run continuous moves, which are the things I'm trying to do if I'm running a truckload fleet. So the earlier you can plan, the better. Now, you may be saying, well, order management is strictly driven by my customer, or is strictly driven by my manufacturer's availability. Well, that's where you got to have collaboration calls and let the data drive that discussion. Try to look for areas, be it at a location level or a manufacturer level, where you're finding that you've got inventory constraints, and that causes delays and or the shrinkage between the time you want to book a truck and the time it's got to pick up. The more time, and I can't emphasize this enough, the more time you have between the time your shipment needs to pick up and the time you can alert a carrier or a broker that you need this to occur, the lower the rates you're going to pay, end period. Undebatable. Mode shift, I'm going to maybe talk about this in conjunction with the concept of freight optimization. I touched on this a few months back in the presentation, and I really don't think I did an effective job, talking about what is freight optimization and how do you execute that within your business. And a suggestion I made was that it's pretty important that you find individuals in your organization that are comfortable navigating data. I'm not saying you've got to go out and buy a TMS or any sort of an advanced algorithmic-based planning tool. I'm talking even simple Excel work, or if the budget allows, onboarding a data visualization software like Power BI from Microsoft. Tableau is a great product. Domo is a great product. Why I love these products is, first off, you don't need software engineers to navigate those tools. You need good analysts. And I will tell you today, you can find interns out of college programs that have these skills, and for $15 an hour, you could have a whippersnapper coming in there and helping you organize your data, load it into a visualization tool, and have that help you with your planning, not just for transportation, but that could be for order planning. It could be for inventory control and/or reduction. It could be for trending, and trying to better understand where you're going to have demand based on your customer base at the vertical level, at the geographic level. But that talent matters, and making time for that talent matters. So when you can visualize your transportation budget, and I don't care if you're spending $25,000 a year or $25 million a year, you will be better off when you have a way to visualize the flows of your goods. Because to the extent you can bring that information to your carrier or 3PL partners and let them collectively look at that data with you and say, you know what, there may be a better way for us to be handling this transportation. For example, for me, I might say, hey, you're moving freight today with YRC Freight that should be going on a Holland truck. Well, why is that? Well, when I look at the density in those two networks, they are so different. You're talking about a $3 billion company and a $1 billion company that collectively handle probably 60,000 shipments a day. So any given zip-to-zip combination or market-to-market combination might be really good for Holland and bad for freight, or vice versa. And freight overlaps the Reddaway network, it overlaps the New Penn network. So where I'm going with that is that I've got pricing gurus like Rick, who's on the phone, who can take your data, because there may be other carriers you're using, not including my YRC family of carriers. If I can see all of the data from any provider you use, visualize it and say, you know what, you've got backhaul opportunities that I really need in the New Penn network. And that's where I might do a carrier shift. Or you may be spreading your volumes out across 5 carriers because you think that gives you diversification. But in reality, you may be spreading yourself so thin that the freight you're giving any one of those 5 LTL providers is not operating well, and all 5 are coming back at you with rate increases. Or they're ignoring you because the volume's too low. That all can happen. So I'm not going to be cheesy and say the data will set you free, but I will tell you that data analytics in the world of transportation is more relevant today than it has been in 100 years. And the reason for that is we are trying to squeeze the turnip. We are looking for every possible way to maximize our load density when we cut a truck. It's imperative. It's how we stay profitable. So to the extent our shipper partners, whether you're, again, a manufacturer, distributor, a receiver of goods, to the extent you control transportation and you're willing to collaborate with us in a very intentional manner, where we look at the data and we start to say, you know what, there is different things we could be doing, I can promise you, you'll find a handful of ways to reduce your cost exposure from what it is today, current state, to what it could be future state. There's other things you can do around mode shift. What I mean by that, if I look at the average cost per pound for transportation, if you can run a full truck or even a 3/4 full truck versus pure LTL, and it may sound like I'm selling against myself here, but the reality is to the extent you can run a full truckload or even do intermodal or fill up a pup, a 28-foot pup, that's a big deal, and it can go a long way in helping you reduce your overall cost per pound at the SKU level. What are some other things we can do? You know, the saying time and money couldn't be more true in transportation. So the faster you need something moved, and obviously today's buyer, everybody wants everything quick. Consumer mentality has shifted into the B2B world. That's where we got to be mindful of. If I'm paying for guaranteed service or time critical service or accelerated service, anytime I'm doing that across any mode, you know, that there's an expense for that. So speed carries a cost. To the extent you can pass that on to your customer, I would try to do that. But to the extent planning allows you to look at forward storage of goods, and now you're in a area where you might be within 200 square miles of 40% of your customer base or 80% of your customer base, there may be cost justification for you to look at a small pop-up depot or warehouse where you're forward storing inventory and doing same day delivery out to the customer base through cartage or through LTL. And again, even with that cost of that facility, your overall cost may go down and your competitive advantage may go up, just given speed and proximity to a given market. All things that are worth analysis. If there's individuals on the call that are thinking to yourselves, I've got a relatively small freight budget, and at the end of the day, I just need a couple of techniques to help me, reduce my cost exposure on, the 50,000 to spend I have, the 20,000 to spend I have, whatever that may be. I would say it's imperative that the association and my companies are constantly looking at how do we provide the entire party, the entire member base, the best possible rates. Part of that's going to be certainly if we introduce our other carriers in the brokerage and we're giving you the best pricing we can, that's great for the smaller shippers. If you're on the phone call today and you've got a larger budget and maybe it's multi-mode, it may, you may want to entertain a one-on-one call or meeting where we roll up our sleeves and do a lot more discovery and figure out if there's other ways that we should be supporting or engaging you as an individual member versus just saying I'm going to take whatever I can get and not spend a lot of time on it. So I would invite you to consider us if a deeper discovery bespoke to your company is merited. By all means, we would love the opportunity. So if you've got the top 15 LTL savings tips PDF that was sent out, and Courtney, if you can come off mute real quick, can you just confirm that was sent out?
Yes, you are able to access that handout in your webinar toolbar. So right under the Questions tab, there's a Handouts tab, and you're able to download it right there.
Awesome. Great idea. So I'm going to actually just pull that up. And before I get going, and I've just, I've said a lot in the last 30 minutes, and I just kind of want to pause real quick and invite any questions. If there was a topic, a statement, a concept that I brought up that either resonated with you, annoyed you, whatever, use this platform as an opportunity to speak up and ask me to elaborate. So I'll pause real quick for 10 Mississippi and let you all chime in if you'd like.
As a reminder, you can submit questions on your webinar tab toolbar. All right, we have a question. What can we do about the change that happens when cross-docking?
So the question was, what can we do about the change that happens when cross-docking? And I may need a little more elaboration, but and let me first maybe confirm.
The damage.
Okay. So how do we reduce damage from LTL cross-docking, if I heard that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, great. That's a great question and certainly very, very relevant. Nothing can create a negative customer or contractor experience more than products showing up damaged. So a couple things that we can do, and a lot of it is on us, the carrier, to fix, and some of it is on the manufacturer, the source point. So if you looked at number one there, and we talked about packaging and making sure that we're packaging our freight in a way that's going to allow us to minimize damage when that product is moving through a cross-dock. Certainly, we can have phone calls with you directly, or we can look at pictures or even do a site visit to say, do we have any tips for you specifically? And it might be product-specific tips to help, with the packaging effort. But obviously, securing freight's a big deal. I think one of the things that can be done is for high volume, maybe not even high volume shippers, but when we see damage, it's pretty important that we look to see, is there an issue at a given facility? And that facility may be an origin pool point center, or our terminal, if you will, or it may be one of our larger DCs. And in many times, it comes down to education, because we, like any other business, have turnover at the labor level. And so education is so critical. And many times, what we can do is we've got quality assurance specialists that are all deployed throughout North America, and particularly here in the States, that we could have look at the product and say, hey, the top 10 SKUs that we're shipping for our IAPD members are these, but these 3 out of the 10 tend to be most prone to damage. And even take it a step further and saying, and it appears here are hotspots within our network. We'll get down to the city level or the terminal level, and it may be a matter of us taking disciplinary action at that level because there's just a pure handling gap. And some of it's training, and some of it sometimes working too quick and not being very careful in our loading techniques. But what gets measured gets managed, and so that's something important for us certainly to do. But the packing process itself is probably 30% of it, and 70% of it's the carrier doing its job and not breaking your stuff. So I'll pause and invite more questions.
Next question. Will most freight companies provide the historical data to help with the analysis to identify opportunities for improvement?
Yeah, that's a great point. So and I'll only speak to my organization, but we have over 250,000 customers. We move 80,000 shipments a day. We have an abundance of data, $5 billion worth of data every year, and obviously we have years of collected data. So that's an advantage that we probably aren't utilizing to the best of our abilities, meaning if we can get with you and talk about your spend, and we've got 450 reps in the field that we can deploy to meet with you directly, and we'll do that as an IAPD member. We'll take the time to come see you, gather your data, look at that, and combine it with all of our intelligence to say, hey, you know what? There's an opportunity for us to better do route planning because of your vicinity to another customer, right? So we may be able to come up with 2 or 3 ideas for you at the location level that might make that freight operate better for ourselves, and in turn allow us to improve the pricing that we offer you. And or discount aside, if you just simply look at, you know, what is my average cost per pound or whatever the metric is you want to follow, things like, you know, the stackability of your freight, things like, you know, the number of bills that we can pick up at any given time. If we're coming out there 5 days a week, and maybe we should be coming out 3 days a week and, you know, getting bigger shipments at the point of origin, all those might be ways for us to be able, you know, to provide better pricing. So that's a really good question, because we can't just rely on looking at your data, you know, in a silo. We want to look at it relative to our total network, and that helps us make a decision on who's the right carrier for us to be shipping with within our family of companies. Or, to be honest, is there a situation where we're running LTL today and we'd be better off moving it over to truckload and doing a truckload multi-stop because we think it'll reduce damage or potentially reduce pricing? That's analysis we can do.
Okay, next question. Can you share any best practices around mitigating accessory charges, i.e. overlength? UPS, Freight, and FedEx will not accept overlength products, empowering other carriers to charge for overlength when perhaps in the past was waived as part of the pricing agreement. And then clarification, UPS Freight and FedEx Freight.
So it's an awesome question. I'm actually allow Rick to chime in if you would, please, sir. And we can talk a little bit about, you know, accessorials as a whole, but certainly in this case, accessorials as it relates to overlength and how a shipper should respond.
Certainly, thank you, Justin. Overlength is a recent issue for the LTL companies, and it's not just YRC Freight. It's as mentioned, FedEx, UPS, and even Old Dominion are severely changing their overlength fees, and it has more to do with the fact that, as Justin mentioned earlier, drivers are in short supply. We are in a position where we need to be selective about how we use those driver resources and what space we allocate on our trucks to customers. Unfortunately, you know, there's a great deal of overlength freight that is difficult to handle, and it disturbs the loading of a truck. You know, when I started in the business 30 years ago, about 40% of the business was palletized. Today, it's 92%. So if we can't load, if we have freight that goes into a truck that forbids us, or prevents us is a better way to say it, from loading pallets side by side, then we're just losing space that, you know, could be revenue generating on that truck. And also it just causes us to have to run more trucks, which delays customer shipments. So from that perspective, you know, overlength freight, now, you know, granted there is a difference between, you know, shipping a curtain rod and shipping a roll-up metal security door, but in the end, carriers have just determined that, you know, when one carrier starts taking the lead and saying we don't want this freight, the other carriers say, well, I don't want to be the dumping ground for everyone's long freight. So all of a sudden the carriers start acting somewhat in concert by increasing those fees. To get to the other part of the question, which is how do you reduce accessorial fees in general, I would suggest that you you download, every carrier on their website has their rules tariff, and I would strongly suggest you periodically go there every quarter, every 6 months or so, and download those documents and just look to see if there's been any changes. Some, there are subtle changes, where maybe the liftgate fee goes from 120 to 127 or something like that. But sometimes the changes in the language of the accessorial. For example, YRC Freight just put in a restriction on liftgates, which really was really there anyway, it just wasn't stated. But now we're just saying directly in our item that liftgate freight can't be more than 2,500 pounds per piece, and it can't be any bigger than 40 by 48 by 95, because that's really the limit of what the truck can handle anyway, and the liftgate can't handle more than 2,500 pounds without breaking. But again, that's just an example.
So Rick, while we're on that topic, I know height and height restrictions, and what's the best way for a shipper to make sure that they're not, to the extent they can control how high they stack product. Tell them a little bit about some of the, the boundaries that they should keep in mind to avoid accessorials or to avoid, causing an unstackable situation with their cargo.
Certainly, in the plastics business, much of the freight, if not the overwhelming majority, is density rated. So therefore, under most carrier rules, depending upon how much of it you ship at one time, you could be responsible for the space above your pallets if that space becomes unusable for LTL carriers. So for example, if you ship a pallet that's, say, 75 or 80 inches tall, but the truck can actually take pallets up as high as 90, a regular LTL truck can handle pallets up to 96 inches, then that 16 inches of space is unusable to the carrier, because we're just, again, with 92% of our freight palletized, we're just not going to find any freight that fits over the top. So because that space then is unusable, many carriers will charge you when you ship multiple pallets for that unusable space, which lowers the density of your product, right? So when you factor in that dead space, all of a sudden it goes from class 150 to class 250, and you've effectively almost doubled the rate. So from that perspective, I always counsel customers, if you ship tall pallets, to ship them as close to 94, 95 inches as possible. And also, if you ship smaller pallets, then try to limit them to no more than, say, 48 to 50 inches tall. 60 would still probably work, because there is plenty of palletized freight that's only, say, 40 inches tall. So, a 55 or 60 inch pallet will generally find something to put over the top. But it's when you compress that dead space at the top to under 2 feet that it becomes an issue, where it might count into your density calculation.
Great, thank you. Courtney, any other questions come through?
Not at this time.
Okay, great, thank you. So another, topic to think about, and this is where you kind of got to back up to the source point. I'm trying to segue as much as I can to the conversation we just had around controlling how we package, and that's certainly cut size. What are the things we're doing, at the source point to ensure our material is even allowing us to follow these packaging best practices. And so, to the extent your supplier base is willing to comply, with some of those recommendations, they themselves may need or want to do that, for the business they're doing as a whole, not necessarily just with you or several members of the association. So, collaborating with them, and even potentially including carrier pricing specialist or carrier packaging and quality specialist in those conversations might help you, versus just being you making a request to a material supplier, to help you out with respects to how they're cutting and or creating the size of the product that you're ordering. One of the things I wanted to talk about, though, was, I think how how the costs that exist today, and if the costs are going up and you feel like you've done everything in your power to be mindful or intentional in how you're aggregating the size of your shipments, the way you package your shipments, you could be doing everything right and still feel like, you know what, I'm seeing my rates go up and I don't have the opportunity to pass those on through my product pricing for whatever reason, the competitive environment, the nature of your customer negotiations, I don't even want to speak to because I don't know that side of the world. But if you're like a lot of our customers, it's not as though you've got the opportunity to pass on these costs. And so that can get very frustrating because you've got, at that point, pure margin erosion, and you start looking at what are the factors causing that. And that could be commodities, it could be fuel pricing, or in this case, transportation pricing. So that's where, and it's again may sound weird for me to say this, knowing that 97% of my revenue predominantly comes from the assets I run in my LTL networks. But the reason why we're disrupting ourselves and trying to create an asset light and a non-asset based set of solutions to augment our fleets is because there are situations where you may just have to avoid using LTL as a whole. And when I say avoid, that might mean from a short haul perspective, there's a cartage milk run option. And that doesn't always have to necessarily be you going out and leasing your own Penske tractor and trailer and running, contractor milk runs. It may mean you're still using a partner to do that work for you, but you're building a cadence and a schedule around how you're going to do that work if that was a pedal run type of an opportunity you wanted to explore. There may be other scenarios where you say, okay, I'm going to come heck or high water, figure out how when I've got long haul of product, and that may, let's just say it's from manufacturer to one of your facilities, one of your stocking points, that you're going to try to get a partial truckload or even full truckload rate depending on how much cargo you can aggregate. That's analysis we'll do for you. Likewise, is there a scenario where running a truckload and having them, stop at 3 of your facilities versus 3 individual LTL shipments going from origin to 3 different sites? I can't tell you in all cases that mode shift is going to be the better opportunity. In many cases, LTL could still be your best pricing, and it is what it is. But to the extent you can do, or with us, allow us to do that analysis, I guess our mindset is if there is a mode shift opportunity, I'd rather you do it with us than just pull the freight off of our trucks and give it to a 3PL or a broker or some other brand X competitor. So I don't say that to sound salesy. It's just more of, as a value add transportation member of the IAPD, we owe it to you to look, beyond just our fleet for opportunities. And to do that at scale can be difficult. And I know Adam's on the phone, and he's one of my main stakeholders that owns the IAPD relationship. So he can't do it all alone, but we'll make sure that we augment Adam with a team of experts that can field phone calls or emails or get in, to collaboration with IAPD members direct, so that we can try to make more bespoke decisions. Because again, each of you has, while you live in the same world of plastics, where you live from a geography, where you do business from a geography standpoint, the volume of business you do, the guarantees you're making. I mean, obviously we live in a rapid delivery environment. So, we may, for any given one of you, focus the concentration of our conversation around speed and speed to market and what are the techniques we can, support there. One of you may want to talk about return goods. How do I manage that? One of you may want to talk about, temporary warehousing and I need 2,000 square feet. I need 20,000 square feet. Where should I do it? Help me design based on my network where that location should be for such a facility if I was going to have a new stocking location. Those are things that we can be doing, again, to just be mindful of, how do we control costs beyond the basics of, getting our classification right, planning ahead. I can't express how important it is to be, carrier friendly if you've got drivers coming into your facilities. We've talked about those things, but you know, a lot of the things that I've been discussing, you'll see here in this top 15. I guess if I was going to really call out one or two more and then invite more questions, because we're at about 7 minutes left, would be if you are a receiver of freight, if you are you're receiving cargo either midstream or you're the end customer, prepaid versus collect is a delicate topic, right? At what point are you better letting your supplier pay the bill and then bill you versus when should that be inbound collect? There's a lot of spend, I bet, right now that's coming in where they're calling it freight free. Hey, if you order this much, the freight's not free. It's buried in to your product pricing, right, or your service agreement pricing somewhere. Someone's getting paid, I can assure you that. So peeling back that onion, peeling back the layers to figure out, am I better getting full transparency to the cost of transportation and handling and directing my inbound freight? In many cases, that's the route to go, because when you look at prepay and add, and some of us do prepay and add ourselves, but it's not uncommon when I'm working with a customer shipping prepay and add for them to add a couple of percentage points to cover their cost of material or labor. They may have a markup to just support margin. If it's buried in the product cost, I may be paying taxes on the freight, whereas otherwise, if the freight bill was separated, I would not have that tax obligation. So there's a number of factors on inbound to just be mindful of. But compliance as a topic when it comes to inbound isn't just about, did I pick the right carrier? It's about, am I trying to optimize? Am I trying to reduce the pricing? That's behavioral, less more so than contractual. So the behavioral, impacts on how you, control transportation costs is important. We're at the 5-minute point, so I'm going to actually just stop talking real quick and see if there's other questions that anyone has that they want to submit.
There was one question, and it might have been addressed, but I'll read it. Do you think that there might be some standardization across accessorial specifications across carriers, like over length specifications? In other words, pallets over 96 to 144 one category, 240 are at another category?
I can answer that, but Rick, I'll let you take a stab first.
Sure. I don't think there'll ever be standardization across carriers, because each carrier is going to offer or charge what they feel they need to either be compensated for those fees or for that freight, or to, in some cases, discourage handling that business. So, in our case, with the extra length fee, we saw what FedEx and Old Dominion were doing, and we changed our charges to be less than that, but still, no question, a large increase from what we had been charging.
And again, a lot of that has to do with, and we're not trying to get a violin, cry me a river here, but volumes can shift between LTL carriers in a pretty rapid fashion. And so to the extent one carrier makes a move, it could create a negative increase in the volume of goods that we handle. In this case, we're talking over length, but too much of any one thing can hurt. And so that can induce us to make a change to our accessorial base. It's not as though it's collusion and there's 5 carriers in the room saying we should all do this, but somebody makes a move and often others respond just to try to control mix, because freight mix is as important as us controlling the balance we have in volume across our complex networks.
There are currently no other questions.
Okay. Well, we've got about 2 minutes to wrap, and I'm sorry I couldn't give you more time back to you Friday, but I appreciate the hour we had. I certainly made some statements inviting deeper, discussion for those attendees that feel that would be, merited. Courtney, if there's a way that we can make Adam De La Garza's contact information available, and then he can pull in the experts depending on the topic, that we need to address with an individual member. Certainly would invite and appreciate any opportunities to work deeper within this association. I'll close by saying, I'm proud of the IAPD for forming a council around this topic. I realize that, it could be argued that we're I don't want to say a villain, but in many cases, your transportation providers are the root cause of this issue. And the fact that you've had to create a council to address these rising costs, we want to make sure that we are being as resourceful as we possibly can be to work well with you all. That's the power of the association. So whether that's introducing, obviously, our other carriers, other modes, data analysis, packaging analysis, we want to do those things because naturally there's organic opportunity for us to grow with you all. So to the extent we can be doing that while also giving you the best possible pricing and the best possible ideas to control costs, we want to do that. With that, we're at the 11 o'clock hour. Thank you again, Courtney. I'll let you close it out.
Yes, thank you, Justin. This concludes our presentation.